Does ASEAN actually matter? On October 26, 2025, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN for short, opened its biannual summit in Malaysia. Every ASEAN summit also features a host of other high-level meetings. This year, those meetings will feature leaders including Brazil's President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, and U.S. President Donald Trump. This roster reflects the prominent place that ASEAN now occupies in Asia's diplomatic calendar. But in recent years, the bloc has faced a number of challenges. Among them, the ongoing civil war in Myanmar, the maritime disputes in South China Sea, and the intensifying strategic rivalry between China and the United States. To increasing numbers of critics, ASEAN has failed to meet these challenges. Worse, some say the organization has developed into little more than an ineffective talk shop. These critics have raised a pressing question. In 2025, does ASEAN still matter? You're watching The Diplomat Asia, your go-to source for Asia-Pacific news and analysis. In this episode, we discuss the history of ASEAN, the challenges the grouping faces, and its continued relevance, or lack thereof, in a world marked by great power competition. Chapter 1. ASEAN's Purpose. ASEAN was established in 1967 by 5 nations: Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and the Philippines. Its initial aim was to foster regional peace and prosperity, and to give its members greater strategic autonomy at the height of the Cold War.
The original purpose of ASEAN was to defend the 5 non-communist major states of Southeast Asia from the red tide of communism sweeping all over Southeast Asia. And so it's very much a creature of the Cold War, which is why when it was created, Washington, D.C. welcomed it, and both Moscow and Beijing denounced it.
ASEAN has since expanded. The oil-rich Sultanate of Brunei joined in 1984, followed by Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar between 1995 and 1999. At the October 2025 summit, Timor-Leste is set to be admitted as ASEAN's 11th member. As it has grown, ASEAN's role has evolved. An important feature of the bloc now is the concept of ASEAN centrality. First laid out in the ASEAN Charter of 2008, ASEAN centrality asserts that the bloc should be Southeast Asia's primary platform for addressing regional challenges and engaging with external powers. It also envisages ASEAN's being at the core of the diplomatic architecture for the region, including great powers, middle powers, and small states. In line with this idea, ASEAN has expanded its relations with external partners. Its diplomatic calendar now involves engagements with the group's 11 key dialogue partners: Australia, Canada, China, the European Union, India, Japan, New Zealand, Russia, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and the United States. These nations and others are also involved in high-level ASEAN shared meetings such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, first held in 1994, the East Asia Summit, first held in 2005, and the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, first held in 2010.
I'd never use the phrase ASEAN centrality because I don't think that captures what the real contribution of ASEAN is. The real contribution of ASEAN is to be a bridge between many contending powers. There's no other regional organization in the world which, when it has annual meetings, brings together all the great powers to attend. United States, Russia, China, Japan, the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, everybody comes for the ASEAN meetings. And that's not about ASEAN centrality, it's about ASEAN utility.
Chapter 2. ASEAN's Achievements. From its secretariat in Jakarta, ASEAN's operations now cover every sector, from economic and security cooperation to tourism, education, cultural issues, and natural disaster management.
Indonesia gifted ASEAN with its culture of musyawarah and mufakat, 2 Indonesian words that mean consultation and consensus. So we spend a lot of time talking to each other. We have 1,000 meetings a year. At the end of the day, we have created this remarkably successful regional organization.
Internally, the bloc operates according to two key principles. The first is that all decisions have to be a product of consensus between all of ASEAN's member states. The second is non-interference in the internal affairs of ASEAN countries. These principles have been crucial to the bloc's longevity and achievements. Consensus decision-making has ensured that the bloc's decisions have genuine buy-in from all parties, while the injunction against interference in member states' internal affairs has reassured regional governments that ASEAN will be aligned with their own domestic interests. These principles underpin ASEAN's main achievements. By giving a highly diverse region a forum for peaceful dialogue, the organization has successfully contributed to a long spell of peace for a region where interstate conflict was once commonplace.
ASEAN is by far the most diverse region of planet Earth. Now, ASEAN has almost 700 million people, has 250 million Muslims, 150 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, and Taoists, and Confucianists, and Hindus and communists. And the fact that ASEAN can take a region as diverse as this and keep it at peace means that it deserves the Nobel Peace Prize.
An important goal of ASEAN is to drive the economic integration of its members and their connections to the global economy. The ASEAN Economic Community, launched in 2015, seeks to harmonize trade rules, improve regional infrastructure, reduce economic inequalities with the region, and increase ASEAN's integration with the global economy. So far, ASEAN has established free trade agreements with 6 nations: Australia, China, India, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. It was also the driving force behind the creation of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, which ASEAN signed in 2020 along with Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, and South Korea. Often described as the largest free trade agreement in history, RCEP covers roughly 30% of global GDP and 30% of the world's population. Through its efforts at economic integration, ASEAN has supported an economic boom that has lifted tens, maybe hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. In terms of both economics and diplomacy, ASEAN has given its member states a disproportionate presence on the global stage. It has allowed Southeast Asian countries to leverage their relationship with major outside powers to their advantage, while, so far at least, avoiding becoming entangled in their conflicts. Chapter 3: ASEAN's Flaws. However, today, the organization is showing signs of strain.
The expansion of ASEAN has made the organization in some ways much more prominent on the global stage, but it has also complicated the organization's ability to reach consensus on crucial questions, particularly those related to China's growing power and the increasing strategic competition between China and the United States.
Perhaps the most significant recent challenge for ASEAN has been how to handle the rising power of China, now the region's largest trading partner, particularly its expansive claims to the South China Sea. China's claims to the South Sea are contested by 5 ASEAN states: Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. However, the bloc's response to China's increasingly assertive behavior has been indecisive. Some member states, like Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, have little direct interest in the South China Sea or are reluctant to imperil their beneficial economic relationships with China by criticizing Beijing's behavior. Even South China Sea claimant states, such as Malaysia, have tended to prioritize the stability of their economic relationship with China over confrontation. As China has ramped up its aggression in the South China Sea, the bloc has been unable to muster the consensus for anything beyond general expressions of concern. In 2012, for the first time in its history, ASEAN's foreign ministers failed to issue a joint communique after Cambodia opposed language criticizing Chinese actions in the South China Sea.
A lot of observers, particularly in the United States, their expectations of ASEAN are probably too high. They also expect that a lot of Southeast Asian countries will view China in the same way that they do, as a threat, and that they would unify to mobilize against this obvious threat. But the position for Southeast Asian countries is a bit more complicated than that. I mean, China is the region's largest trading partner and is the largest trading partner to, I believe, 9 of the 10 current member states. And so, they are not willing to put their relationships with China at risk by endorsing a harshly critical or even a mildly critical ASEAN position on the South China Sea disputes. And China, I think, has leveraged these divisions.
ASEAN has continued to place its faith in the negotiation of a code of conduct with China. That agreement has been in process now for 2 decades and shows no sign of completion. According to critics, ASEAN's fragmented and indecisive approach has also prevented it from developing a coherent approach toward the related issue of China-US competition. Yet, ASEAN's advocates say the bloc's influence has kept these disputes from spiraling into a major conflict.
Some very wise soul once said that the purpose of the United Nations is not to take you to heaven, it is to save you from hell. So the purpose of ASEAN is not to take ASEAN countries to heaven, but to save us from hell. And like every other region, we have bilateral problems, bilateral issues, outstanding geopolitical tensions. But the question is, how are they managed? And everyone talks about the South China Sea. Just imagine if in the Gaza Strip, both sides were spraying water on each other instead of shooting at each other. That would be a much safer world, right? In many ways, ASEAN has helped to either mitigate or solve many of the problems in this region that could have become much, much worse.
Another issue that has tested ASEAN is the ongoing civil war in Myanmar. Unlike many Western nations, which imposed sanctions on Myanmar after the military coup in February 2021, ASEAN leaders unanimously decided to maintain communication channels with the military regime. 2 months after the coup, the bloc agreed to a peace plan known as the 5-Point Consensus. But the Myanmar military has since failed to implement its core tenets. ASEAN has been divided in how to respond. It has banned the military regime from sending political representatives to its summits, but continues to engage with it at lower levels.
I don't know that any outside power could successfully coerce the Myanmar military into respecting human rights and, diverging from its chosen path. And I think this has been an issue for ASEAN, not just since the coup of 2021, but going all the way back to Myanmar's admission to the bloc in the late 1990s. ASEAN's ability to put pressure on the organization has run directly headlong into the bloc's non-interference principle. ASEAN has not really known how to respond to the military's lack of action to implement the 5-Point Consensus. Unfortunately, this has left ASEAN looking ineffective and its peace plan looking mostly stagnant and moribund.
Some nations like Indonesia and Malaysia have called for ASEAN to take a harder line and even go so far as to meet with opponents of the regime. Others, such as Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia, have advocated engagement as the only way forward, arguing that anything more would contravene ASEAN's non-interference principle. This connects to a long-standing criticism of human rights activists that the principle of non-interference in member states' internal affairs has provided a shield to rights-abusing governments. To its critics, ASEAN's inability to solve these problems reveals the limits of its decision-making model and could eventually undermine the goal of ASEAN centrality. To some observers, ASEAN governments now have more interests in common with external powers than they do with their fellow ASEAN states.
I think that the reality for ASEAN is that on certain questions, there are members of the organization that have more in common with countries outside the organization than they do with their fellow ASEAN member states. The Cambodian government, to take one example, the government of Myanmar even, have more to gain from close cooperation with China than they do with siding and supporting a country like the Philippines that's being exposed to a Chinese pressure campaign in the South China Sea. The divergent interests between member states is probably one of the things that holds ASEAN back the most. If you want an organization that represents such a diverse region, this is probably an inevitable limiting factor.
Chapter 4. So, does ASEAN matter? ASEAN's failures are closely related to its successes. The same principles that have allowed the organization to endure where past experiments in regional organization failed have also limited its ability to respond decisively to today's most pressing crises. The organization's expansion in the 1990s has made arriving at consensus on serious issues more difficult. This difficulty will only be increased further by the admission of Timor-Leste.
For ASEAN to function effectively, its member states have to come to identify the regional interest as a core part of their own national interest. I think this is something that united the founding 5 members of ASEAN, who all faced a similar threat from externally backed communist insurgencies. But I think that sense of shared purpose has waned since the end of the Cold War. For a lot of governments in the region who are focused on their own domestic, political situations and in preserving their own hold on power, the national interest is increasingly coming to override any sense of regional interest.
But for all its problems, ASEAN still matters. In a recent interview, the organization's Secretary General said that critics are often pessimistic about the divisions in the region, but that there was still a strong spirit of negotiation within ASEAN. This was demonstrated in July 2025 when Malaysia's Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, acting in his capacity as ASEAN chair, presided over a ceasefire agreement with the leaders of Cambodia and Thailand. The agreement brought to an end 5 days of fierce fighting between the two nations along their long-disputed border. Anwar's action was an example of ASEAN working as it was intended, as a means of bringing the region's leaders to the table to resolve their differences peacefully, but it also demonstrated some of the bloc's limitations.
One has to ask whether one's expectations of ASEAN are realistic and whether, this is an organization that can wave its magic wand and bring conflicts to an end. I think in the case of the Cambodia-Thailand dispute, you have two nations that, for their own political reasons, have had an incentive toward greater confrontation over the border dispute. I think we can give ASEAN some credit for providing a forum through which the two nations were able to discuss the issue. But in terms of the ceasefire, I think arguably the thing that really brought both nations to the table was a threat from US President Donald Trump.
Despite its successful track record of peace, ASEAN has been unable to resolve the border dispute between Cambodia and Thailand, which has festered for years. The dispute previously erupted into conflict between 2008 and 2011. How much of a role ASEAN played in brokering the 2025 ceasefire also remains unclear, with later media reports claiming that it only occurred after the US President, Donald Trump, threatened both Cambodia and Thailand with economic consequences. Yet, for all of ASEAN's shortcomings, it remains the best and perhaps the only means by which the Southeast Asian nations can preserve their autonomy in a less stable and more turbulent and competitive world.
ASEAN has evolved into probably the most successful regional organization in the world today. If you compare ASEAN with all its peers, not with some hypothetical, mythical regional organization, ASEAN has outperformed all of its peers in the world. And it's a pity that that has not been given due recognition, because there is some hidden genius within ASEAN. The one big point I would make is that our entire world would be a safer place if every other regional organization came to learn lessons from ASEAN.
Thanks for watching The Diplomat Asia. Now you know all about ASEAN's history, purpose, and relevance. If you're enjoying our content, visit thediplomat.com for comprehensive coverage of Asia-Pacific geopolitics. Use the link in the description for 10% off your first year's subscription. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth information on major events and trends in the Asia-Pacific region. Leave a comment below if there's a topic you'd like to see covered by The Diplomat.